See, check 1 2, check 1 2. Hello, hello. Happy Wednesday. It's office hours for me here, Michael Jones with MoGraph Mentor. If you're hanging out today or you're watching this later, thanks for checking it out. Each Wednesday I'm just gonna hang out here on the YouTube channel, do some office hours. Any questions that you have about MoGraph Mentor or about any of our classes, any of our mentorships, anything like that, feel free here, excuse me, in the chat to ask any of those questions, and I'll try to stay on top of that. But also just a cool excuse to hang out and work on design, animation, 3D, 2D, whatever it is. So today I'm going to jump back into designing some 2D vector art for this explainer video that I'm working on, and I need to design all of this out, and I've got kind of a first shot going, and we can quickly run through how this piece of artwork was created. Excuse me. And if you're new to Illustrator, maybe this can be helpful and useful for you. So to basically create this shot, there's really only a handful of techniques that you would need to know to go about this. Let me just dock my stroke panel here with my layers and gradients. My process is usually always to try to set some kind of background first, just so I'm actually setting some of the values, right? So I need to know, what is the shot going to be dark or is it going to be bright? That's really the first question. How is it going to look over the top? What values am I going to need there? And then I usually like to just hit Command 2 to actually lock that top layer. And then, as I talked a little bit about last week, starting from this kind of one-pager, doing story beats, and then doing some storyboards to try to think about the progression of this video, and then just jumping in and designing a first couple of frames. So right now I'm working, the one that I was working on was just this first sound effect after this explosion where we're seeing a million sound effects, but I want to, kind of really zoom in and focus in on this sound and then see this play bar and then try to think about some kind of, radiating lines or sound effect lines or something like that. So I'm actually going to go back to the background. Let's just get into the designing here. Make it a little bit darker, actually. And this shape here, so the biggest note is that if I'm gonna work with gradients, then we're getting into the territory of a light source and directional light. So that instantly makes me want to just think, all right, where's the light source coming from? Generally, I need to think about that. So let's say the light source is kind of up here, coming from this top right area. So let's go ahead and apply a gradient. And to do that, by default, we're working with a fill. We can come up to this menu here and simply add a gradient. Let's see, why isn't that working? Add it from the bottom here. Oh, it should have worked. It could just be a quirk of my Cintiq being a little old, but I'm going to apply it. Down here, you can toggle between fills and gradients. And if you're totally new to Illustrator, of course, this top square denotes the fill, and this bottom one is the stroke. And if you hit X, these flip, or you can just try to click them. They're a little often hard to grab. So if you hit X, you're going to toggle the fill. And we, of course, want to work with a fill shape here as the base. So let's go ahead and add a gradient, and then I actually need my gradient panel. And if you don't see your gradient panel, go to Window and Gradient. Of course, I've just turned it off, so let's go ahead and turn it back on. And here's where we can, actually affect this gradient, or I can hit G to bring up the gradient tool, and I can actually kind of affect it here in the viewer. I can also just start drawing, and if I want to angle it a little bit more, so if my light source is up here, maybe actually I want to run it a little bit more in this direction, and this is actually the brighter part of the image, the brighter value, and the darker value. So actually, this white is going to need to be very dark, and then this darker area is going to, let's go ahead and lighten it up a little bit just by pulling it back. So if I hit V, let's go back to my selection tool, you know, I get a first shape kind of like this. So I'm going to hit Command-C, Command-F, and sorry, pause for one moment here. Let me actually turn on Keycaster. Sorry about that. Nope. And move it over here where you can actually see it. So that's when I'm using keyboard shortcuts, that should be a little easier to follow. So let's see, did I already duplicate it? Command-C, Command-F. So Command-C, Command-F is copy and paste in the same exact place. So I'm going to copy and paste in the same exact place, and then grab one end of this top rectangle and just bring it over, and let's start doing our faux 3D. And if we actually, oops, I'm going to Command to this back one here to lock the background. Then I'm going to hit A to bring up the selection tool. And then you can kind of eyeball this. And really the point is like, all right, where's my horizon line? What is my perspective? And of course, this is sort of faux. So we're just deciding it in real time here. So let's say something like that. And then bringing it. I want it to just feel like essentially a rectangle. Hey, thanks for hanging out, Rattlesnake. Love love your YouTube username. That's pretty good. So I'm a big Command-C, Command-F. Why is that not working with Keycaster? Sorry, y'all. One second. Come on. Keycaster. Keycaster. Is not wanting to work. Man, sorry, y'all. Well, I'm just going to call out the shortcuts as they're used. So Command-C, Command-F. If we go to the gradient panel for this shape now, you know, this is the darker side of the image because we're saying, all right, light source top right, the value should be darker. So another thing we can always do is just flip the values. And so if we bring a little bit of a lighter value towards this edge, that gives us a nice, interesting feel of atmosphere to just kind of watch this gradient. And it's always a safe bet that when you're working with gradients, if you are gradiating, you know, to one extreme value that is close to the background value, whether it's white or black, it always gives a feel of atmosphere. It always gives a feel that it's kind of fading in. So even if this was all white and we were using white and gray, I would just want to match at these edges, right? Because it just gives you a bit of it feels like the atmosphere is kind of creeping over ever so slightly. But the other point is to say this front value should probably just be a skosh darker. I don't want it to be as bright as this value over here if we're doing a kind of diagonal right to left light source. So that gives me a nice looking cube. You can see in the first one though, I want it to feel like a cube that acts as a case. So there needs to be another layer of perspective drawing inside of the base shape. And I also am kind of imagining a stroked line animation here. And just like a hotter color, almost just, you know, like something to play with that it could almost like feel like it's activated, explaining it poorly, but I think you probably get what I'm saying, and maybe just like animate that around. But I also wanted it to feel like that stroke was set into the face of the cube as well. So let's go ahead and just build that. So again, Command-C, Command-F. I can just hit V and hold Shift-Option-Command to scale from the center. And I don't really want it to look quite like that, so I am going to pull these out. And I am using a Cintiq pen with Illustrator, which sometimes, which I like, but it can definitely sometimes be a little bit slower than a mouse. So you see, I'm even getting a slightly different interpretation on it. I think that's kind of cool, actually, to feel a little bit more rectangular there. So the big note on this piece is it needs to be way darker because this is the interior. And I'm actually just going to revert back to a fill for this shape, just to feel like I'm cutting against it. And maybe we don't want to go to pure black, but we just want a value that's pretty close. Excuse me. And so yeah, if I go too close to this value, it's not going to work to give us a big clean edge there where it feels like it's kind of dropped in a bit. Then I'm going to Command C, Command F, and really the last note, when you draw the interior of a shape is you just want to see, this inside wall to the right. So we should just be able to put a value here that's a bit brighter and feel like we're kind of looking inside of a cube. And then, this is obviously still adjustable if we want a little bit of a chunkier border, which the more I see it together, looks a little bit cooler. So that's that portion. I'm going to Command C, Command F. The base shape again, the largest rectangle. So copy and paste in place. Let's work with a stroke. And so to do that, I actually came back to this panel on the left here and just hit this swap fill and stroke command. And so we actually did apply a gradient to that stroke. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to choose random colors just so I can see it. And we can bring up some swatches, take it to orange and pink. And so I should start to see an orange and pink border around the whole thing. I'm going to come up to this top panel, take the stroke width up a little bit. And then again, with the Cintiq pen, try to get this in. A little bit more. So basically, I think I did want to just decide about this element early on, and then we'll go ahead and do the effect of the in setting, but I think it makes sense to just build this piece of it first. And I was going to go ahead and round this out a little bit just to create a little bit of curvature into the shape. It could be interesting on this version to just grab this side and actually match a bit of that and give it a feel like it's actually kind of beveled. But obviously we would need to work on this edge here. I just wanted to select this edge, but not the other edge. Yeah, could get a bit squirrely in animation, but leave it for now. I'm going to Command C, Command F this stroke, and I'm going to set it to just a fill. Double click this fill and just make it a very dark, a very dark value. Take the stroke width up considerably, find it in my kind of layer stack here, and drop it underneath this really hot colors. And yeah, the Clark, welcome. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. And just like adding as much stroke there to try to feel like we're kind of carving in to the face of this. The really next level addition would be to add one other shape to like see, the inside edge of this. But maybe too small of a detail, and it's just one element, so might not be worth it. But that's essentially that piece of it. The other big thing I wanted was to feel like there is a bit of a glossy glass surface to the face of it, and you can see it. I ended up dialing it really back on this version, but you know, that piece is a pretty easy technique as well. So let's just grab an ellipse, just make a big old ellipse, and I'm actually going to label this in my stack just so I can see its gloss. And we want it to be a gradient, oops, we want it to be a gradient fill, and each side of the gradient has a color, but it also has an opacity. So we can essentially make this white, and then the second color doesn't matter quite as much. Well, it is going to matter, excuse me, because of the blend in the center. So let's say white to white, 100% opacity to 0% opacity. And that's how we can, you know, try to get a more feathered edge. So it's nice that the gradient tools allow the opacity to go to 0. Oops. And then, right, if it's like way too strong on the other side, we could pull that back. Now, to mask it in, we need to create a clipping mask. So again, if you're new to Illustrator, clipping masks are pretty easy. But let's just grab the base rectangle. And I'm going to Command-C, Command-F again. So I'm copying, pasting in place. Let's see, you can remember gloss and base. You basically need to kind of take your two elements and then hit Command-7. The other way to go about that, let's see, it's like clipping mask, make. So Command-7, make a clipping mask. And so basically that process is like whatever you want the shape to do the clipping is the top shape, and the shape that you want to see is the bottom shape. So you kind of like set up a masking system, select them both, Command-7 that, and then mask that in. So you get now this kind of sheen element that you can, you know, at least work with here. And I did end up dialing the first layer back. A good glossy effect may require more than a single layer of gloss, and maybe even not positioning it so kind of wholesale across it, but seeing it move across multiple, you know, boundaries of this shape could be one way to go about it. Now, it's definitely not the best looking one. So take it way back. And then, you know, building these elements were pretty simple. This is a stroked line. This is, yeah, that's actually a pretty good, we'll rebuild that really quickly. So these are all strokes. And I basically went to the line segment tool. You can hit the tilde key or go and select the line segment tool. And if you hold shift, you can kind of click your mouse or your pen. And let's see, if I don't shift, then I'm like freeform placing lines. If I hold shift, it kind of constrains it to 45-degree angles. And I basically just went through and created a bunch of lines and then used my alignment tools to select all of these lines, go into the alignment, make sure the spacing was good, and then just try to create what looks like a sound effect. There's usually like some kind of burst, and then there's you know, not a lot happening on the rest. So that piece was pretty simple. But in terms of creating this triangular little playhead, the way that I like to do that very quickly is to create a rectangle, rotate it 45 degrees, and then just delete the bottom of the shape. So this could be a fill, and again, Command-C, Command-F, and then I can grab this shape, the duplicate, hold down Shift, and drag it over and give it kind of a 3/4 look, and then change its value to something else. So in creating that kind of flat perspective playhead, and it's like pretty close to the perspective line across the center. So technically speaking, oops, if our perspective was a little better, it would this point would drop down a little bit because we're almost looking down at it ever so slightly. And I could quickly recreate this shape here. Oh, you know what I did? I connected the shapes. Oops. I'm not sure why that doesn't want to solo. So yes, I think you get the idea on that technique for creating simple faux, and I just like the, you know, simple rules around, you know, a third either way. I think just avoiding, you know, it doesn't look dimensional at all if you just place it in the center. So just kind of picking a third is usually a pretty safe bet. So I like most of what I got going on inside on this previous layer. And so I'm going to Command-C, Command-V this time, the waveforms, and that copies and then pastes in a kind of random other spot, because I want to bring that to this other layer here. And sometimes the grab tool doesn't want to work. You can see on this version I might need to extend out the waveforms a bit, but it gives me a bit of an idea of what that looks like. I'm gonna trap all that stuff down. Command-C, Command-V, and then I'm gonna Command-G to group. So if you ever just have like several pieces of vector art, and it should be in a group in a single layer, Command-G is the keyboard shortcut there. So I did actually apply a gradient to these little waveform pieces as well, and I think it is fitting, you know, kind of harmoniously into the design to add a little bit of a gradient there. And it's right, like a really subtle kind of purple. Let's bring that one up. Go to my gradient and take a look. Yeah, a little bit of a darker purple to a lighter purple. And same thing, we're just matching the light source. So light source top right, you know, gradient, whatever. This piece is getting darker, and these are lit in a kind of similar fashion as well. And then, you know, I did a first attempt on these background elements. So let's go ahead and come back to layer 4 here. And the way that I went about doing that was creating an ellipse from the center, holding Shift-Alt-Command to scale from the center, and just creating a stroked circle, and then doing Effect, Distort and Transform, Zigzag. Let's see, we could smooth it. And, you know, an element like this for a motion design, at this point, I just want to think about art direction and how it's going to look. So let's say, you know, this was the form, the shape that we were going to be using as sound is, you know, emanating from this sound effect. It's a different question of how you would really do it in After Effects. Like in After Effects, it might make more sense to just use a distortion there, but at least you would have a kind of guided art direction to be able to determine how you would need to make that effect look inside of Adobe After Effects, because the distortion that we put on this, it won't be customizable in After Effects. It'll just come in as a baked shape, but this animation, I want it to start out, you know, and really feel like there's movement throughout these pieces. So I'm gonna need an After Effects distortion that I can ramp, you know, up or down to create a more moving distortion effect. But all that to say, when you're doing the art direction side of it first, it's really not as important. And this is supposed to be a subtle element. It's kind of interesting. I was doing the white over here, but the purple is kind of cool as well. It's always good to kind of version up. And Still probably a bit bright, probably stealing too much visual attention, and it's but what I like about it is actually that it's kind of matching our light source a bit. So I'm going to Command C, Command F, and then that same Shift Option Command to make a duplicate. I'm going to come back to the center shape and Command C, Command F, Shift Option Command, bring it down. And you can see as I scale it down, the distortion effect is treating it differently because now, you know, it's slightly different. So I believe it's under Appearance. If you go to the Appearance window, I can find the zigzag effect that's applied and tweak its settings. So, you know, the 25 pixels when it's here is way too much. And if you're the designer telling the animator, this is actually a good chance to show them the progression of like, yeah, maybe the distortion is really minimal. Let's see. When it's first coming out, and then it gets more distorted. So we could also come to this middle ground and choose its zigzag and maybe back it off slightly. Come to this one, Command C, Command F, pull it in a bit more, and then take a look at its zigzag and maybe actually zero it out. So it actually would show you, you know, perhaps the progression of it, and these feel like these should be a little more even. So that would be another version. Don't know that I love that one either. I'm gonna Command G all of those layers so I can quickly create another clipping mask. Take the appearance out of here. And basically I just need to choose the whole background rectangle, Command C, Command F, throw it on top of those, select both, Command 7 to clipping mask that in to the shot. And then, you know, in terms of just storyboards here or whatever, we could see, you know, it really should feel like a secondary effect. So yeah, that's kind of another version at it. You could see V1. I thought this was kind of cool, but this didn't age very well in terms of those background. I don't think that's super great. This seems a little more coherent. So that's kind of interesting. Also went with a slightly darker background on V2. I kind of like that. This hot orange and pink, you know, is nice. Good to have some kind of color. So I think now I would just probably want to kind of dive into another shot. Let's see, which one should we start laying out really quickly? There's all this cool fluidy stuff that's going to need to be solved. There's this whole sequence with this kind of audio software concept, and then this fun little mouse cursor. There's the video player with sounds and like social media likes floating up around. Yeah, let's just do like this shot here. Cool. And I'm pretty disorganized at this stage when it's just so early and you're trying to literally just figure out shapes and colors and what this is going to look like. So I've made a shape, there's nothing there. I can hit I for the I tool to always just bring up the ability to select anything else going on in the project and just transfer those attributes to this shape here. So get a background in there, Command 2 to lock it down, and then start putting some shapes in. So there's this main kind of play area. And if I go back to my reference file, sometimes a nice trick is I could just make a copy of this really quickly and just go ahead and do a clipping mask around the shot that I want to work with. And I'm going to need to bring that up all the way here. And then I can Shift Option Command and give myself this reference just so it's faster. Of course, the resolution and all that stinks, but it doesn't matter. I just want the reference. And it allows me now to just like think about the composition, think about the scale, the field of view, the size, and all that. And generally, I want to keep everything relevant inside of the title and action safe here. Otherwise, it's going to probably just feel too big. We could even just bring that opacity down. And then lock that one as well. So since these are just rectangles, let me just put some shapes. If I hold down Alt, I can make a duplicate of this shape and simply drag it out. And these are elements that are sitting vertically, so we can go ahead and put some faux 3D on here and add some perspective to this in a moment. I'll Alt drag and I'll just match up the top here. And I'm gonna hit A, inch that over ever so slightly. Bring this over here. And if my perspective is, well, we're gonna have to fix it, but. Now, because I just did that kind of freeform transformation and I want to make sure it's a little more perfect, I should be able to use my alignment tools on individual points. So I just selected both of those bottom points and I will hit the center line alignment. So yeah, those are already centered. I can see my perspective needs to inch over ever so slightly, I think, on both sides. I just want it to feel kind of expansive. So that's that piece. You know, another way to go about it would just be to hit P to grab the pen tool and just do it freeform. And then take a look at what you have. This is where using the alignment, especially on these perfectly horizontal lines, see, right, that one jumped a little bit. That wasn't perfectly in place either. So at least now I've got my basic shapes to kind of build some additional elements. Let me just turn these off and go back to what I was thinking in terms of the design. What kind of characterizes a piece of software. So I'm going to need some lines in here and maybe some shifts of value to make it clear that this is like a timeline where clips would live. And then I just need kind of random stuff, but let me just quickly add the fun staged visual element. This is another one of those things that as a motion designer, and if I hold Alt, I should be able to break this. If you lose the connection there, just go back and click the base one. And I better start breaking up these values or they're going to be hard to see. Yeah, as a motion designer, this is one of those shots where it's like a lot of this stuff's getting recreated in After Effects to an extent. So Command C, Command F. I just want to mirror my design. Come back to layer 6. So again, fine for now. For me, it's just like the quicker I can just get art into the scene and look at it, the better off. Sorry, y'all. The better off I am in terms of. I love working with the Cintiq, but at the same time, sometimes the lag and the delay on it with clicking. But I love how close I am to the art when I'm on the Cintiq. So since we're using gradients, I'm just going to continue to apply. Well, let me wait on that stuff. Come back to my layers, bring a lot of this back in. You know, this piece here could be the opacity pulled down ever so slightly. So Command-C, Command-F. I think first of all, it needs to feel like there's this kind of panel. So maybe all the sound effects need to be a little bit further to the right than I was thinking. So make sure my perspective lines are roughly matching. Maybe I could pull some icons in here. And then come back to the tools panel, maybe just do line segments and see. And right now these have no attributes. They don't have a fill or a stroke, but that's okay. I can hit V and go and select these 3 lines, and let's just assign a lighter value to a stroke, and then take it up to maybe 4 pixels. You know, even 4 or 5 pixels at 1920 by 1080 is pretty small. Like, I just very rarely ever have anything that is 1 pixel in any piece of art, because sometimes it's imperceptible, unless you're, you know, unless it's appropriate. But so basically, nope. I'm going to take it back to this gradient here so that when I turn this off, I can actually see what I'm doing here. And then these elements need to be 100%. But this base, just want to apply the gradient for now. I'm gonna have like a button that says render, pop in. So yeah, a little bit of setting the stage here. You know, the lighting concept is definitely, they're all lining up with the grade, you know, the light source coming from this direction. So that's kind of interesting. Although in the storyboard, the, you know, the main element is coming in from the right. So we could flip these all 180 degrees and have the light coming in from the other direction. I can Command Z that and see how that looks. Shift Command Z to redo. The other thing we can do is, you know, like we said earlier, just customize each of these gradients to their shape. So you select it, hit G for gradient tool, and then you can draw each one on a little bit custom. I'm not sure why it's jumping down like that, but it's kind of the idea. So with these lighter values, these, I like these as a light value, but let's just see if it creates a little more structure. Yeah, and this is where we could Command-C, Command-F, duplicate, lock down the background. And you know, this line here, I see I need to fix the perspective a bit, but if you're confused about the perspective, you just need to look at your existing lines and decide where that horizon line is and that vanishing point. And so that's going to kind of inform that. And so I'm calling the horizon line up here, right? Because we're seeing this dynamic like we did in the last shot. So way too chunky. It's really meant to feel like this kind of software panel with stuff on it. Right, and we could change that, right? We could be seeing, we could put the horizon line down here. That might actually be a better option, right? So, oops. Command C, Command F, grab the top layer, Shift select the top two. Maybe the horizon line is actually here, so we're actually seeing the bottom. Oops, no, I didn't want to move that up. I want to move that over and then probably up. And that's kind of what I like about this, right? We could decide the fall off point in real time. Now this stuff's going to have to be adjusted, right? Now we're pinching the perspective in a little bit more, which is fine. But if it's close to the horizon line, it's like almost horizontal. So we would only be seeing, you know, a very, very small amount of it. And then it's, you know, kind of under the light. So I wonder if we just fill that with black, if that actually becomes a more kind of coherent approach. Actually, I'm not going to duplicate that shape. I'm just going to hit M to bring up the shape tool and do this kind of thing. Come and affect this gradient a bit. Well, it's already 100%. Just try to change that value up ever so slightly. Just creating enough, you know, enough shapes here to kind of have something interesting. And I do want there to be a feeling of horizontal lines, right? So the principle of alignment matters, and the thing that's making this a bit visually uncomfortable is kind of the lack of good alignment. And so if I hit Command R, now that I have some stuff in here, I can really make sure I've got some structure to this image, even though it's meant to look kind of like an illustration. And we could back that off. And really, you know, this is going to tell me a lot what's going on in terms of these lines matching up. So we would be seeing the inside and the front. But the edge line there would be perfectly vertical. Gosh. And this would be a perfectly vertical line as well. And this is a perfect rectangle, so we can just do this kind of thing. So it's like a decent start. The black there probably isn't holding up quite as well. So I would just kind of choose something with a darker value than the screen. And then maybe rotate that like 180 degrees. Let's change that up. So Command semicolon is how I turn the guide layers on and off. So I'm going to turn them back on. And again, Command R hides or reveals the rulers. And so again, just about alignment, making sure that when someone looks at the image, it feels really structurally perfect as much as possible. So I'll just hit A. I'll just put this. And then this kind of thing. And this probably needs to get a little bit thicker. So, you know, alignment's one of those subtle things, but of course it's like one of those things you feel more than you necessarily perceive. And so, right, come on. Little interactions like this. Yeah, I think I don't want to mess with the perspective here, so I'll just, sorry, I'll actually expand this whole top design. And then try to think about what the alignment would be here. It's almost like that shape would be perfectly aligned here. But I don't want to change. Well, actually I'm going to end up expanding it a bit, aren't I? So, needed to be a little closer there, so I can just readjust the front side. And it needed to be a little bit more straight up and down here. And this isn't really correct. It's really more. I'm going to see a very thin piece of the bottom of it because if the horizon line's in the middle, Command C, Command F, V. Again, we wouldn't see much though. Command semicolon. So, getting a better structure, whatever ends up happening with the art direction. Could also play around with more vertical gradients there. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, but suggesting kind of a light source here, which is a little weird. Darker at the bottom. Yeah, there's something nice about that. This front edge needs to be darkened up a bit. Make sure I'm saving periodically. So thanks for anybody who's hanging out and basically watching me do some homework. But, you know, this is kind of basically the process is, you know, we talked about it, storyboarding, story beats, and then, right, just kind of copying the structure. There's still another layer of challenges in terms of animating in After Effects and all that good stuff. But, you know, this is basically how I like to go about it. So if I come back to the layers and I turn on this clipping group, it kind of gets to a point where it's more helpful just to have the reference off to the side. Since it's obnoxious to be turning stuff on and on. It's like, all right, we get that. I did want there to be, had this concept of kind of a playhead, which would be a fun, challenging animation because, you know, if you design your playhead to be like so, let's say, hit escape, hit V. Let's get some values we can see on this stroke line. Hit V. Bulk that up a bit, right? You see you can instantly see that the perspective is wrong. So if you were going to animate this as like a faux thing, you would actually need to make this shape dynamic. You would need to turn that into a shape layer in After Effects. So as it's animating across, you would actually see the perspective shift, right? Which is basically, by the time this gets over here, this is kind of this thing. But that's where pose-to-pose animation comes in, where I could just do the first pose and the second pose, and it may work, right? And that's probably better than me trying to eyeball the perspective, right? Because if you just have the middle point here in a totally linear animation, right, as this thing starts to get to the center, there's a point where it's just going to look like a straight line in the center, but, right, that might just be 2 keyframes, which is great. It's like a keyframe here. Now watch me try to do it and that not be right, but that should definitely get you really close. You know, pose 1 or something. So in this sketch, I had some kind of idea about seeing the time ticker kind of thing. So let's see, what's a good way to just grab the line tool. Hit A, command semicolon to bring back some guides. Let me add some guides to this edge as well. You know, what I love about alignment is like it's just free. It's like free quality. If you just do this, you know, when you're using basic shapes and whatnot. So this is one of those instances where maybe you do want something that's really subtle. Right, maybe even just 1 pixel. And let's say there's like, just to get some visual variation. I'm just going to alt drag a copy out. Get that nice and aligned and centered. And then just push that over a bit. So there could be some bigger markers maybe. And then I'll alt drag a duplicate. And then maybe like half or a third the size, just so there's enough visual variation. Always got to have some variety. Oops. No. And here, switch to the mouse. It seems like it would take a long time, but it shouldn't take us that long. Part of the problem is I don't normally have my computer set up like this. It's more for doing YouTube streams. So, just continuing to duplicate the whole bunch until I've got a whole bunch of them. And that's kind of a lot of elements. Then from there, I can just basically do 2 poses on the extremes. Let's say there's this side, and there's this side. Need to kind of match the spacing I had though. And then we're just going to use the align distribution command here to shift select all of these, and let's see, it should allow us to distribute these across, and then we can kind of see, Yeah, maybe it's getting a little jammed up in the middle. What's it look like if we do something like that? So, you know, it was in the sketch. Command G that. Maybe turn this to like 25%. It's in the sketch. I don't know how, oops, how cool that really is or not. But so yeah, it really needs to read more like a playhead. But let me just create some perfectly horizontal white lines over here. And see what that's getting me. Yeah, maybe these should be like waveform levels. Although we need to save some. Really, really right. So I always need to remind myself, like, where do we want to be looking? Well, we want the audience to be looking in the middle because there's this shape that's going to come down into the shot. And so that is the focus. So yeah, we don't want to spend too much time on that side of the shot. But we'll come back to this base shape, Command C, Command F, hit V. I just want to create the appearance of some panels. And if you're ever using the gradient tool and you, let's see, and you're getting this error here, it's like, well, why the hell doesn't the gradient tool work? It's because this stack right here, the swap, stroke, and fill, the fill gradient absolutely has to be on top for it to work. If those are flipped, it does not work, which is a mild annoyance every so often. So yeah, this is where I probably need to be looking at some more reference of audio software, that's for sure. And variation, and I'll try to add some stuff in there. Now, you can see how poor alignment makes the image look crappy. So I can see that actually these 2 points are not perfectly aligned. So that's going to be important. Then I want to make sure the spacing is all relatively good, and then this bottom as well. Let's see, did I freeform? Yep, that alignment was off as well. So this is the video player. I'm going to command semicolon because I need an extra layer of reference now to see about this kind of interface design. Oops, let me lock that back up. Feel like we're using the top of that image. And then there does need to be more the appearance that this is the actual video player. So it just needs to go on top of the base rectangle. I'm just going to black it out. And then hit V. Right, for something along these lines. Move this over. Touch. Right, so that's all, you know, there needs to be some kind of looping animation there. We're seeing waveforms, we're seeing the player go, and we're seeing this sound effect come and land itself here in the shot. So that's a pretty decent start for this shot. A long way to go. I think we can really spice it up by then adding the more iconic audio kind of features, a waveform kind of going up and down here, maybe something with some kind of scopes or other, audio looking little things. I'll need to look at some reference to kind of put in simple iconic stuff. We don't want to steal a ton of attention. Maybe those are like light gray. But the big idea was to then have, these sound effects come into the shot. And then I didn't really have the whole radiating sound thing, but right, the shot looks a bit flat, unfortunately. Let me see about, can I please select that color? Something along those lines there. Yeah, and I want to make sure I'm, representing elements across the shots as well. So I think I should do another version of a playhead for this scene. Slightly darker value there. And right, again with the faux perspective, which of course we want to try to keep with, I need to come to this shape and actually enclose it and add a third point. Put these back together. Use the align tool to put those back together. Then I just need to match up those points and then bring that point down a bit. Right, now it looks rotated. So actually to design that properly, it needs to actually be kind of coming down from more of the center. And of course that's gonna change too, but then the lighting needs to match on top of that, so that actually would take a bit longer, but right, can't just be totally flat, although we'll see. So we're at just over an hour now. If anybody has any questions, please let's chat about it. Thank you so much for checking out MoGraph Mentor, and if you've taken any of the classes, thank you so much for taking the class, and hopefully it was helpful, whatever it was, 2D or 3D. We got mentorships starting this weekend, big weekend. We got orientation. We're diving in, new people learning After Effects and animation, people going into more advanced 2D and then more advanced 3D as well. And we're basically, like 100% project-based. The introductory animation mentorship has a good deal of just guided video content, but for most of our mentorships, the idea is to make work and just kind of simulate the studio artist environment where you can be pushed to make better work, think about adding more intention into your work, whether it's 2D art direction, all that kind of stuff. But orientation starts this weekend, so if this semester is a good fit and you're interested, please check it out, and we'd love to work with you. And yeah, Clark, thanks for hanging out, man. If you're already enrolled, very much just look forward to kicking off this new semester with our orientations and just onboarding everybody. And then, yeah, for just over 2 months, right about 9 weeks, just making work, trying to get better with animation, with design, with 2D, 3D, all that good stuff. So we're looking forward to a really good fall. Yeah, talk to you all soon. Thank you for hanging out. Best of luck on your projects, whatever you're working on, and we will see you next Wednesday for another Office Hours live stream. Thanks, everybody.